Okay, very good. What we want to start with here is an understanding that CorelDRAW is an application that's very powerful and very diverse, and because of that, you see it used in many, many environments. And color management is a function of the application that allows you to use it in all of these environments, but you have to understand some of the settings that go on so that you can use it properly. The individual who uses color management properly can work in all the environments. The user who only has a very specific workflow, for example, the person who does embroidery or the person who does laser engraving, may only choose one set of color management settings, and then that's all they need to do for the life of the application. What we're going to try to do here is discuss a little bit about these settings. Now, I want to let everyone know that on the CorelDRAW website, you can go there and search for tutorials, and there is a tutorial on this default color management settings dialog. Now, I want to show you how you reach that again. It's under Tools, Color Management, Default Settings. Now, these are the application settings. Application settings are handled so that the application itself knows what to do. There are also document settings so that each individual document has its parameters to operate in, and CorelDRAW can operate with one set of application settings, but also open a file that has different document settings. It's document structured color management, which CorelDRAW X5 moved to, and CorelDRAW 6 also continues with. Now, the default settings for the United States, North American prepress, North American general purpose are the settings that CorelDRAW X6 will come up with by default. If you just install the application and the first time you open it, you go to Tools, Color Management, this dialog is what you'll see. If you search for the tutorials on CorelDRAW's website, you'll realize there's an entire tutorial that shows you what every one of these settings are. And the concept of this tutorial is to go ahead and give you more of an overview. I could spend probably 45 minutes to an hour just on this dialog. The only settings that I would recommend that we would change from the default color management settings are these here. I would change to a perceptual rendering, and if you're looking to be compatible with Adobe, I have Illustrator opened up here under the Edit Color Settings. You'll see here that I choose perceptual. Illustrators and all of Adobe settings are relative colorimetric, use black point compensation. That actually changes relative colorimetric to very similar to perceptual, and then the only setting that's common for color engines between the two is Microsoft ICM. I do not use Microsoft ICM personally because I do not appreciate the quality of the conversions at the engines. So I choose to use Microsoft WCS, which is Windows color system. CorelDRAW also ships the LCMS, which is a little color management system, and it also supports Microsoft ICM CMM. If you're using older versions of Windows and Microsoft XP, it only uses Microsoft ICM CMM2, and then Vista, Windows 7, and then Windows 8 is using ICM3. I suggest these settings. I also suggest that we stick with map gray to CMYK black, and I do not select preserve pure black. I have custom settings that I use. You'll see here, this stands for CGT, my company, and then sheet fed coded. You'll see I use Adobe RGB. I use a very wide gamut Kodak. I use perceptual rendering, and I use Microsoft WCS as my engine, and then I have these check marks selected so that mismatched profiles, missing profiles always pop up, give me a warning, and then I can make a choice on what I want to do. The first concept of color management is to understand that we have our create a new document dialog. Now I have this, which is on the toolbar here, okay, and then you can go File, New, and that pops up, and you can hide this, but this will actually look at your application color management and mimic that when it first pops up. A lot of people don't like to do this, but this will actually tell you and control. You can actually change the color management settings that you want for a document that you're currently creating. The concept of this is also to understand that when you're working with color in files, there's one more setting that's really relevant, especially for the digital output. And this is under the page setup, layout page setup. You'll see here your rendering resolution. CorelDRAW, unlike the competitors, will allow you to work all the way up to 150 square foot. So if you're going in and you're going to be making a full-size presentation of a 25-foot sign, you may only want to set this for 100 DPI so that your rendering doesn't eat up as much system resources. And the reason this affects color is output of digital devices. Not all digital devices, but some, especially inkjet rips, are dependent upon the resolution upon which they are fed, and then the resolution of the output profile. It's a little more complex. All you really need to understand for CorelDRAW is to select a resolution that is only what you need for output. To move on from these basic concepts now, what I want to do is I want to open some files, and I want to deal with the one workflow, which is color management off for the guys who are doing embroidering or they're doing laser engraving. I want to show this again as I open it. File, I open it, and color management off. Double click it, comes in, and it's telling me that it's different than my application. This is correct. It's because here I have these checkboxes set up. It's telling me that it's different than my application. I go here, I open it up, I say it's okay that it's different. I want to view it as it is. I want to use the embedded color profiles. Now I'm seeing this file as it was intended to be seen. Now, the reason I mention this color setting is twofold. First of all, the term color management off was something that was used in older versions of almost every graphic application that you could ever possibly imagine. However, it's incorrect. There is no such thing as color management off. The application in the computer must make some assumptions about color, and that's some type of color management. Now I select this black box, and you'll see it's got a RGB outline and a CMYK fill, and you'll see how it converts. These are incorrect. This is cyan 0, magenta 100, yellow 100, black 0, and it converts to straight RGB 255, 255, 255. Those are just incorrect. However, these type of conversions are required for specific workflows. So while it's incorrect in terms of ICC compliant, that's the International Color Consortium, these conversions are incorrect by their rules. They are not incorrect when one is working in the world of laser engraving or embroidery. You'll see here the green, cyan, and yellow, both 100, straight to a green channel, and the same with the blue. These are incorrect. However, they are perfectly correct. So for those of you who have been using CorelDRAW 12, X3, X4, and you've moved into X5 and X6, you may set this setting here, Tools menu, Color Management, Default Settings, and you'll see right here that CorelDRAW has Simulate Color Management off. That's what you would choose, and then you can duplicate the older versions for your laser engraving, and your conversions are identical as they were. I show this image because we need to discuss, pardon me, we need to discuss the aspect of using this setting. Tools, Color Management, Default Settings, Preserve Pure Black. There's an issue with printing ICC controlled color from applications to PostScript devices and non-PostScript devices. They see things differently, and that's the subject of our next file. And I want to open that up, and that would be PCL print black swatches here. And what we need to understand is that when you're using CorelDRAW, it's so diverse, you can go to so many different places. An inkjet printer setting by your computer itself, plugged in with a USB cable, may or may not be PostScript. And the way to tell is when you go File, Print, you see mine goes by default to an Adobe PDF, and you have a PostScript tab. You have a PostScript tab, you have a PostScript printer. If not, you don't have a PostScript printer. And when you take a look at this, you'll see my brother device, which is a little scanner fax all-in-one printer that I have hooked directly to this device for this presentation, does not have a PostScript tab. So it is a non-PostScript device. Now the issues that we have is one of using the graphic device interface. All graphic applications have to comply with PostScript, they have to comply with the graphic device interface, and they have to comply with ICC color management. And all colors in an application, when they are being printed to non-PostScript devices in the print stream, the first step they will do is they will convert from whatever color space is in the file. It doesn't matter what it is. It will first convert to RGB. And black converting to RGB does not convert to solid RGB 000. R0, G0, that is not a proper ICC compliant conversion. So if you're working in CorelDRAW or any other graphic application and you're working with this color black, which is K100, it's going to convert to RGB to something else. What RGB it converts to will be dependent upon your color management settings. However, it will never be R0, G0, and B0. Okay? And what happens is when it prints to these non-PostScript devices, it will print as a gray. Now, I've resolved this by creating my own color palette. You'll see here, I have a cut contour for when I do cut out, but I have a grayscale palette. It's right here, and let me get rid of the outline. And you'll see here, it's black 0, 95% gray is 27, 90% gray is 36, and I go all the way down to a simulated 5% gray of 232. Now this palette, when I'm working in files that I know will be going only to non-PostScript devices, I use this palette for black. This palette is available at my website, www.graphictechnology.com, and it can be downloaded, and I use it for black. It will print 100% black when you print to a non-PostScript device. And I wanted to show you here that your Pantone process, it converts to K100, but it goes to RGB incorrectly. It goes to R43, 44, and 43, which is unfortunately, you can't use Pantone process black because when you print to a non-PostScript device, you're going to get a gray also. Pantone black itself, it just converts incorrectly again. I mean, the conversions are correct. However, they do not print with the desired result, which is devastating to someone who wants their black text to come out as a solid black. You can see this converts to R5046B1. Now, my grayscale palette does. It will convert straight to RGB 000. And we will show a conversion here. And you'll see here that converts straight correctly. So those of you who are using your inkjet or even small laser printers that are non-PostScript, this is how you can solve that problem. It has been an issue that has plagued many users. This actually is the way that other applications do it, except we're being a little more right up front about it. We're explaining the issue as it stands and then showing you a viable solution. This image
David?
here, which we saw in the previous file.
David?
Excuse me?
Yeah, sorry, usually I never interrupt,
Yes?
but we have a participant who would like you to describe again the non-PostScript printing process.
Okay, not a problem. I'll be more than happy to do so. And to be honest with you, we could spend days on this one subject alone because it's a very good subject and it's something that really needs to be understood. The graphic device interface. When I take this file and I go File, Print, and I choose a non-PostScript device, which is my Brother 240C USB printer. As you can see, I have no PostScript tab here. All non-PostScript devices require that all of the file contents, all color data will be converted to RGB by design of the computer world. They have decided that this would be sRGB, standard RGB. And when you print to this, all of this data has got to be converted to RGB. It doesn't matter what color it is. When you look in your color tabs, what I do here is if I like my color to be converted, I go File, Print, Color tabs. And whoever asked this question, by the way, thank you very much. This is a good primer for me because color conversion can perform by, and then what I do is I tell it to be the brother device. And then I correct the colors using sRGB. And then I pick perceptual rendering. And the reason I do that is if you look at the definitions of rendering intents that are available in my book at www.graphictechnology.com, relative colorimetric rendering will convert colors from one large gamut to a small gamut. However, only the colors that from the large gamut that fit into the smaller gamut will be converted identically. The ones outside of that will be modified greatly. Perceptual rendering will convert all the colors, not necessarily as accurately, but in a perceptual manner, and will create a much more pleasing result with the final print. So this is a very good lesson, And this is how I do it. It's how I suggest that you experiment with this. Some devices will actually allow you to select a media profile here. My device will not, but they actually can then convert to a media profile from this dialog. In most cases, that'll actually happen in the printer dialog itself. But that's the process, and I want to go over it again. All color, you see here, I have CMYK, I have Pantone Process Black, I actually have a CMYK image. When you go File, Print, and you select a non-PostScript device, no PostScript tab, the first step in the process, and this is done in the application, is the RGB, and for color, by default, they'll come up CorelDRAW, but I select my printer, I select sRGB, and I select Perceptual. And in those cases, you'll find that many times your print will work much nicer. Okay? Now, the other concept I want to talk about, pardon me, is we're back to this image again. And with non-PostScript printing, many people, and you'll see this on the public forums quite a bit, instead of using a black palette, which is specifically designed to work for non-PostScript devices, under the tools, color management, default settings, they will pick preserve pure black. What happens is that your CMYK content will be converted to R0, G0, and B0, and the problem with that is easily demonstrated by this image we have here. I have put, as we can see here, let me enlarge this, I have put a square in this image of CMYK black. Now what happens is when this is converted, it's all converted to a dense black, which is, you'll see here, because that's what we've told it to do if we use these settings. If we use this setting here, which I'm not going to do, we've told this black here to convert to this black up here. That's what we told it to do. However, if you have an image that has a lot of details in the black, for example, a gentleman that has a dark charcoal suit with a black pinstripe, if the charcoal color suit is dark enough, when you convert it, it's going to posterize the entire suit and it'll look like a solid black suit. And that's an issue that becomes very dangerous for people who work in a mixed environment. If you work only in embroidery, if you work in laser engraving, if you work only with text, this setting is irrelevant. Tools, color management, default settings, if that's all you work in, it's totally irrelevant to you. However, if you work in a mixed environment where you have no idea what's coming in, you have no idea where you're going to go to until you get the file, you could ruin images easily by using that setting. So I recommend that we do not use that setting at all. I recommend that you use a grayscale color palette for black, and then you can work in PostScript and it's going to work fine. Your conversions of your images will be wonderful, especially if someone sends you a CMYK. This is pertinent for individuals who will send you a CMYK image that you then need to print out. You can get very good color with non-PostScript devices. You just need to understand the rules and how it plays. Don't want to make any changes here. I want to move on to my next subject. This, I call it Ritter Mockup. The reason I call it this is it's Ritter Mockup. This is, I want to demonstrate very clear examples of CorelDRAW's capabilities. First of all, we're working on a 250-inch document here. I have another one for this company that we're doing that's actually 400 inches. We can work in full scale on CorelDRAW. We do not have to mess around. This is not finalized work, but these will be cut out using the cut contour, and this is done to show that it's supposed to be a frosted material, but we use a cut contour. Oops, well, we do when we do it correctly. There we go. But the concept here is we're working, when you look here, tools, color management, default settings, I'm working in a full pre-press sheet-fed environment. But I open up this file, this is a sign environment now, and my program asked me, oh, this is a different color space than what we know. Should we just use it? And we can use it, and it works fine. And now we can actually export this. It'll be sRGB. We can shrink it down, send it out as PDF or as TIFF, and it can be viewed in web browsers. It can be viewed in email browsers, and the color shifts are very minimal. That's really very powerful for CorelDRAW. I'll go one step further. CorelDRAW will allow you to work in RGB, allow you to work in CMYK, allow you to work in spot color all at one time, and the competition doesn't do that. And then the competition just fails at anything past 200 inches. I'm going to show you another. This is a project that we're doing. I wanted to show you. Now this is also an sRGB project. It actually will be going to a web press. A little transparency being done. You'll see we're at 300 dpi for our rendering because we're going to be going to press. And this is what they call late binding. By late binding, what's that meant is that while we know it's going to be some type of CMYK output, and the text is in CMYK, we're not sure where we're really going to go, so we've left the images as RGB. And the images will then be converted to CMYK at the proper color space at the final output. And that can actually be done through the proof docker. Look at the color proof settings, which are right here. When you export, you can export as soft proof, and then you can attach your color profiles. I prefer not to do it. I prefer to do it manually so that I can actually see the conversions take place, and I'll tell you why I prefer to do that. Because of this. This is a picture actually of me and a friend of mine. We do a lot of sign business together. And we had these pictures taken specifically because of the gamut of the shirts and the jacket. When we show our color proof, I'm going to click the color proof on. I want you to watch the top image. You'll see how it's shifted. And it looks more like the bottom image. Okay? Let me move some stuff around and zoom in as much as I can. Okay? Now, your color-proof Docker is Windows, Docker's, color-proof settings. And this Docker turns on. And when you click it, it will actually soft proof whatever you have selected here. And you can look at have RGB images and see the color shift that will occur. I do this because I want to talk about the out of gamut alarm. Now, out of gamut, to represent color in a computer, we have to give color a property in which it really does not have, and it's a three-dimensional relationship to one another. And for something to be out of gamut, what it means is one color space has an X, Y, Z coordinate that does not exist in the other color space. Now, as we can see, when I click Soft Proof, all of my shirt, I'm going to zoom in just on this image here. All of my shirt, some of Nancy's jacket, and a lot of the plant behind us, which I really don't know what kind of plant that is, shift, because it's out of gamut for CMYK. Now the problem I have is the green marker showing what's out of gamut only shows a small amount. So out of gamut alarms are not necessarily accurate. I've never seen one accurate, so I don't use it, but I do think that using proof colors has its value. And the other aspect of this is CorelDRAW. When you look at them side by side, you realize that this one is displaying in the CMYK profile of my default settings. It's displaying using that because it's CMYK. CorelDRAW will do this. It will display RGB in the RGB color of the application or the document, and it will display CMYK, tools, document settings, in that. So it will actually display them simultaneously. And that's something else that the competitors do not do. It's a very decent feature. It's a very viable feature. And I certainly use it like this all the time. It's a very good concept. Close this out, and let me just see what we also used. I wanted to show you that Corel Photo Paint. Let's go to my desktop. We use Corel Photo Paint quite a bit, and we use, this is a function that I wanted to show you here. It comes up, use the embedded color profile, and we're doing what they call Z-Clay prints all the time in Photo Paint. It's an excellent product, excellent capabilities. Right now I'm currently working on a project for a local historical society of an 80-year-old image that is almost 43 inches by about 9. The color management settings in Photo Paint, the dialogues are identical except for this concept here. Okay. When you look here, okay, you have the same dialogue, but here what you have is primary color mode. Okay, and this is something that we need to talk about, the difference between Photo Paint and the difference between CorelDRAW is that Photo Paint will work in one color space at one time. CorelDRAW will work in more than one color space at one time. This will control your dialogues. Come up with CMYK. It is more important to realize that when you're using your shadows, your renderings, if you're creating CMYK documents, you set your rendering resolution, and now you're rendering, which is being controlled here sets your primary color model. Okay, and that's a significant aspect to understand. The controls here are very viable. The problem we have is that we need to understand how they function. There are a couple other issues that we run into in advanced workflows, especially those of us who have to go back and forth with Illustrator. The issue that we see here is a file like this. When we open it, we need to understand that Illustrator itself, this file here, this aspect of it is a gradient that is created using transparency. CorelDRAW, when it creates a transparency, creates a transparency. When it creates a gradient, it creates a gradient. However, if someone gives you a transparency or a gradient and you bring it into CorelDRAW, they're both going to be created, they're both going to be treated as a gradient. And your gradient from CorelDRAW sent over to Illustrator will be treated as a transparency. And when they go to the RIP, many RIPs will treat transparent objects and gradients completely different, and you're going to get a color shift even though it's the same object. So, the professional workflows require that we take a look at that and understand that concept, and it's not something that we can adjust for with our color management settings. It is something that we have to deal with, and it's not a problem unless you don't understand it. So I want to recap before we leave here. I have a few minutes left, and I want to make sure that we recap this. Okay, CorelDRAW tools, color management, our default settings. These are not defaults. I'm going to go down. North American general purpose. This is the way CorelDRAW will come. The only recommendations I ever make for anybody who wants to be compatible with other applications is this. I change perceptual. If the other application uses Microsoft ICM, then you have exact color engines. I don't like the conversions that happen with Microsoft, so I don't use it myself personally. The spot color definition we should touch on for those who are using older versions of CorelDRAW. Pantone controls this process, and because they control this process, they dictate to Corel how this is supposed to be done. Corel, starting in X5, upgraded to the latest definitions, so lab values are being used to change your spot colors to CMYK, okay, and to RGB. That's the lab value done. However, if you're using older versions, you may, and you need to be compatible with those older versions, you may need to, in this setting here, choose RGB values or CMYK. That's just a unintended consequence of upgrading to Pantone's newest specifications. Pantone dictates this. This is just what it is. I will tell you this much. I use nothing but lab values because the further as I go forward, the conversions, like say from Pantone 471 to CMYK is much more accurate. But these are the settings that I recommend. They're default settings except for this one. And the reason I don't choose that is to use a relative color metric clips out of gamut color so severely that it's prohibitive in my view. So I use perceptual. Perceptual is very, very competitive with our competitors using their relative color metric of black point compensation. Black point compensation is the default setting. However, black point compensation is not ICC compliant. It is something they made up on their own. If you turn off black point compensation and then simply choose perceptual in the competitors, you'll find that your conversions, if you use the same engine, are nearly identical. We're talking 1 or 0.2% in the conversion process. That's what I recommend here. It's a very good setup. If you're looking at what I use myself, I use basic settings. CGT, my company, I use a sheet-fed setting. I use a sheet-fed uncoded. And then I use an internet setting. So let's go through this again. I have my sheet-fed print set. You can see what they are. I'll let this set a little bit because it's, when they record this, you'll be able to take a look at them. I use a sheet-fed uncoded, and you can see here the main difference is there's a different TIC. And by the way, when you take a look at the CMYK, I'll show you this one again. These are actually Kodak profiles that have been on my system forever and ever because they came along with older versions of CorelDRAW, and they're very good profiles. But that's all I use. And then I use an internet, and then I use the CMYK to convert my CMYK data, and I may change that if it comes from an uncoded. I do very little uncoded work. But that's where the CorelDRAW settings tend to work for me very, very well. They will work for you right out of the box. If you're having trouble with your conversions being a little hard, and what I mean in the shadow area, they're much more dense and they lack detail, then go to this setting here, Tools, Color Management, Default Setting. If your settings are hard and they lack detail, change from Relative Color Metric, change to Perceptual, and then change your engine, okay? Now, the other aspect that we want to just go right back on and check again here quickly on this because I'm running out of time, is this is your non-PostScript printing. When you get print, it's File, it's Print. We pick our non-PostScript device, and now all this data has got to convert to RGB. So in our color, you see here, Corel remembered what I chose, except I set that. Okay. Now, you can also uncheck that. Okay. Those would be what I would select for my non-PostScript device. The device, if you're printing it, would be your device. The color profile here, you may want to try Adobe. You may see a change that's pleasing to you. Rendering percent, perceptual, and I turn off Preserve Pure Black. And then this works. Of course, the issue I'm seeing is that my image is below 96. But that's the way non-PostScript printing works. And I am out of time because I promised Cecile that I would end and leave some time for questions and answers. And I hope that you will give us some questions and see if we can give you some answers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Yes, we have some questions, very interesting questions. Let's start with Yogita. Yogita is asking about the difference between relative colorimetric and perceptual. If you can explain a little further between the difference between relative colorimetric and perceptual.
I'm having trouble understanding you. What color and what other color?
No, what is the difference between relative colorimetric and perceptual?
Colorimetric.
Yeah, sorry, it's a
okay.
hard work to say for a French lady. Sorry for that.
Not a problem. Okay. Relative colorimetric, and I suggest that we go to the website at ICC. It's in my book. I have a layman's. Let's see if I can find it here on my thing. I have a layman's. I have a layman's description of that on my book. Let's see. Let's see if we can find this quickly. The difference is the problem is this. When we take a look at color going from one space to another, what we're looking at here is something like this, okay? The left image represents a color, okay? The middle image represents a smaller color space, and the right image represents the very same size color space, but converted using two different processes. What we see here is this color here and here that's in gamut represents the same, but we lose all of the stuff that's out of gamut. And that's what happens when you use relative color metric. Color from the original source space that will fit into the destination space properly comes across unchanged. But the color that does not fit into that destination space can be, in some cases, severely clipped and look distorted. This one here represents, this image here represents perceptual color rendering. What happens is while you see here, this area here over here is smaller now, all colors are changed slightly, but this circle, as we perceive it, looks much more like this one. That's a layman's understanding. In my book, I actually have proper definitions. If you, www.graphics.com, I have a combo book deal for those with X4, X5, X6. There are actual proper definitions there from the ICC, and when you read it several times and you understand it, that is what led me to not use relative color metric. Relative color metric is very good if you're going from a color space that is almost identical or very near to the source space. Then it's fine because you don't get a lot of distortion. But if you're taking a large gamut color space, say Adobe RGB or ProPhoto or Heidelberg wide gamut, or for those in Europe, they use the ECI, which is a very nice RGB color space. If you convert that to like a sheet-fed coded or uncoded CMYK, that's a tremendous compression. And what happens is the conversion a lot of times just looks horrible. And that's why I choose it. And that's really the difference in a layman's term. I suggest that you Google the ICC Color Consortium and then read the proper definitions there, or you can get them from my book. Is there another question?
Oh, yes, definitely. A lot of questions. A question from Lee. Once colors are downloaded from your site, how do we install into CorelDRAW Graphics Suite X6?
Oh, yes, that's a good one. I don't do that very often. Palettes.
And if you prefer, David, I can take Lee's email, and if you want, you can
yes,
answer
why don't you
him.
take that down, because I don't want to hunt around. I rarely do this, but I think that's a good one that I could email that back, or maybe even post that on my website and email the individuals so that they can get exact steps to do that.
Okay.
It's really very simple. As a matter of fact, it's so simple I've done it and forgot about how to do it.
Okay. So I'm taking Lee's email, and you will. I'm telling him that you will send the step via email.
I will send step-by-step instructions. You bet.
Okay, excellent. Other questions from Roger. David, I often work with CMYK documents. I run into significant color shifting when converting supplied RGB bitmaps to CMYK. I realize this often inevitable, but do you have any suggestions as to what to look for to minimize color shift?
Okay. Minimize color shifts. Here's the first thing to look for. you're bringing in RGB images, I'm hoping that those RGB images are tagged. And what I mean by tagged is that CorelDRAW can identify what color space they're coming from. And that's very important because if that's improperly identified, you can get a tremendous shift because Corel may assume the wrong color space. I highly recommend that if you're taking RGB to CMYK, that first of all, I would not use the Microsoft Color engine because to me it's too hard. Two, I would use perceptual rendering right off the bat. And you may also want to try, depending on where they're coming from, in my experience, I have trouble when I take pro photo images, really ultra wide RGB color spaces down to like a web coded space. Sometimes I'll take them from pro photo down to Adobe and then down to CMYK. But more than likely, you're going to get a color shift. As you saw in the demonstration that I did with my shirt, even with my, what I would call a light medium blue shirt, it color shifts because it is out of CMYK gamut. Some color shifting is unavoidable. The concept of being someone who corrects color is managing those color shifts in a pleasing manner. And quite frankly, I think getting rid of relative color metric rendering is the first big step I would take. Another question? Are we okay?
Sorry, David, I didn't. I was on mute. What is gamut?
Gamut. Okay. Gamut, we were talking earlier about the process of taking color with something that has no physical properties and putting it into a representation inside the computer so that we can render it. We have a three-dimensional rendering. Gamut is the height, the width, and the depth of color. And what that basically means is hue, saturation, and lightness. It's the color space, a color gamut. Pro Photo has a large color gamut. sRGB has a smaller color gamut. It's the amount of colors that can be represented inside that space. Okay?
So, thank you. Another question. Please tell settings for color profiles for the design sent for printing on offset printing. I'm not sure I understand. Please.
I don't understand that either.
Please, could you share the settings of the color profiles for the design sent for printing on offset printing?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I think yeah.
Color management? Okay. The default settings for North American prepress, and here's what I would do. North American prepress, I would go here, and I'm not sure if this person is from America or where they're from, but this would be what I would use for North America.
Yeah, I think she's from India.
India. That might be what I would use for India. I'm not sure I have an American version of CorelDRAW. I know that we have a European prepress, okay? But the settings I would recommend would be in your local area. In Europe, I know it's ECI RGB. The web or the CMYK being used in your area, a lot of times they're using an ECI coded. In the United States, almost everything is going to be US Adobe. It's an Adobe CMYK and Adobe RGB. These settings are very regional, but as you can see, I stick with always perceptual rendering. I use a Microsoft Color Engine, and then I use these regional CMYK settings and RGB settings. I believe most of Europe is going to be set up very similar to this. I do with some gentlemen on the Corel Public Forum, and I believe this is what they're using in Europe. In the United States, like I say, this is what you're going to see. I make up my own because I have quite a bit. I actually started my career on a printing press, and I prefer, this is a much wider CMYK gamut and a medium wide RGB gamut. I hope that's helped you, but for future reference, when we get questions like this, the regional area is important because we do everything, everybody does everything different depending on where they are. Any other questions?
Yeah, there are still many questions, and I'm currently taking the email address of the question that will not have the time to answer. One question from Stefan, one of our CorelDRAW master. RGB.
Stefan, I know him.
Yeah, I am sure you know him, and I'm pretty sure he knows you. RGB color space, if make original work into PhotoPaint RGB, would you recommend to always embed CMYK profile?
No, you never. If it's an RGB profile, embed the RGB profile. That way we know where it was coming from. And this is a very good question. When you create a file, whether it's a CorelDRAW file, whether it's a PhotoPaint file, embed the profile that you created your document in. And in Stefan's case, if he's working in CorelDRAW and he's worked with nothing but RGB, all of his elements in his file are RGB. When you save the file, Corel is only going to embed the RGB profile because it doesn't see any CMYK elements. And that is correct. That's the way it should be because you need nothing else to reproduce that file correctly. You only need the color profile of the elements that are in the file. And Corel does this correctly. Any other questions?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, David. Another question, what is coated on uncoated?
Okay, coated, uncoated, it's paper. When you look at a magazine that has a shiny surface to it, that's a coated paper. When you pick up a newspaper, it has the, it doesn't have any shiny surface to it, that's uncoated paper. The web process, it kind of gets confusing because people have the internet. The web process refers to the type of printing press. A sheet-fed profile can be coated and uncoated. The sheet-fed process generally runs on a higher quality paper and can carry more ink density. The web process actually prints from a roll, and then at the end of the press is a roll, or sometimes goes into a bindery operation, but it prints from a roll. Henceforth, the web, it webs through the printing units, and that also can be coated or uncoated, but generally they carry less total ink coverage because the papers are generally thinner. Okay?
Okay, thank you. So I'm taking more questions on email address. So basically, Yogita, Imran, and Liz, all your questions, I will send them to David, and David will answer them by email. Last question. I use sRGB EIC 61966. Wow, it's a little complicated. So Yogita, can you send me your email address, and I will directly give your question to David.
Here is what they're using right here. Okay, that's what they're using right there. See it?
So yeah,
sRGB
it's the one.
IEC.
Yeah.
Yes, sRGB IEC 6 space 1966-2.1. It's the very same one I used.
Yeah.
That is the universal default for everything.
Okay, so it was, and Yogita is saying it's her default.
It is
Most
the
of,
default
okay,
RGB color space for non-PostScript printing. It's the default color space for all non-color managed processes, including the internet and almost every moderately or low-priced digital camera, every cell phone camera out there.
okay, okay, excellent. Perhaps the last one on the other question will be answered by email. Which profile is used to uncoat paper in sheet-fed offset?
Gee, what part of the world are they in? You
I
know,
don't know where is Kalyan.
if we're in the United States, U.S. web coded, and then there's a U.S. web coded,
He's
U.S.
in
web
India.
uncoded.
Yeah, he's
He's
in
in
India.
India.
Yeah.
In India, it is more than likely a Euroscale uncoded V2. I think if you actually do a search under Euroscale color profiles, you may see a different color profile there. It is very, like I say, it's very regional. And it also, there's a difference, like if you look here, you'll see here that we have, in some cases, here's your Japan web-coded, okay? And then there's an uncoded, but then there's also a Japan newspaper, okay?
Mm.
And the reason they do that is they do newspapers on very inexpensive paper. So they really make a smaller gamut for those. So it really depends on where you are, but it's easy to find by Googling on the internet and just asking, in India, web uncoded ICC profiles, and they'll pop up, and generally if you ask your printer, they'll tell you what one that they're using.
Okay. So another question, I think that will be the last time. I'm sorry, we have it's always color management, color profiles. It's always a very hot and very interesting subject. So I'm going to take the last one, and I will give you some information after this last feedback from David. Is color profile may vary machine, from one machine to another machine?
Okay, that's an interesting question. Okay, to answer the question, one has to understand the process that happens. When we have an application, we have our creation profiles. We have our RGB and our CMYK color space. The CMYK color space, generally, when you take a look at them, you'll see here, I use this one, a default light color 360. What that means is that this has a TIC, a total ink coverage of 360%. Okay? Now, that's my target space. What will happen when this gets sent out is that color space will be then converted to the press's color space. Is there a different color profile for every device? Yes, there is, but not as far as the user is concerned. The user from the file application really needs to have a concept of just this. I'm working on the web, so sRGB. Okay, I'm working for newspaper, so I have a newspaper profile, and that should be chosen regionally. I'm working on sheet-fed production presses, so you have a coded and an uncoded. So what I basically have is a coded and an uncoded for sheet-fed. I have a coded and an uncoded for web, and then I have a uncoded for newspaper, and then I have my internet, and that's all I use. You don't really need to worry about the profile for the individual device, because in the end, they're all going to convert to their profile on their device in the end. It simply needs to be tagged. When you send it out, your file has the information so it can convert properly. And I hope that helps you.
Okay, great. So I'm taking the last question. So basically, yes, unfortunately, I think next time we should perhaps plan for 90 minutes. I'm still receiving a lot of very good questions. So I've taken all the questions that have not been answered during this webinar. So two things on that. The first one, we'll send all your questions to David. David, you know what I'm proposing? Perhaps you can answer to each person, provide you the feedback to each person, but also I'd like to compile all your feedback and perhaps have a post on CorelDRAW.com in order also all the participants benefit from the other questions that have not been answered during this webinar. So
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, so please keep me informed, copy me when you are answering to the person, and I will
What
compile.
I will do is I will CC you on every answer.
Exactly, and I will compile all the questions and post your answers in about 2-3 days on CorelDRAW.com. Other things, yeah, other point also that I would like to mention to everybody, David will still be with us on next Thursday the 25th of March from 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock Eastern Time. He will be available on Facebook, on CorelDRAW Graphics Suite Facebook page. And again, it will be a nice opportunity for you to ask more questions on the Facebook page to David. So it's another good opportunity to ask more questions. So thank you very, very much, David, for showing all the secrets of this mysterious color management in real workflow. Thank you very much. I'm receiving a lot of very good feedback at the present time. Thank you everybody for your positive feedback. Also, I would like to mention that next month we'll have another webinar like each month. So Joseph Diaz, who is a graphic designer, sign artist, and CorelDRAW Masters, will give a webinar about creating cartoons in CorelDRAW. That will be a funny one. It will happen on April 11th from 12 to 1, same time than today. So I'm very excited about this webinar, and I hope you will be able to join this webinar. I'd like also, if you'd like more information about CorelDRAW Graphics Suite, you may know the address, corel.com/CorelDRAW. Thank you very much for everybody for your attendance today, for your great questions. Thank you very much, David, for sharing all your techniques. And just talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.